Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Songwriting Simplified with me, Jonny Lipsham, here at jonnylipshamstudios.co.uk, here in the southeast of Scotland, which, as everybody should know by now, is the capital of everything. Literally everything. Apart from sheep and maybe donkeys, because donkeys are aliens. But apart from that, we are the boss of everything here in Scotland. Anyway... Welcome back, everybody. I apologize for the lack of shows during last week, but I was absolutely floored by a very nasty case of flu. There is a particular nasty strain of that particular virus that is kicking about that took me almost completely out. I was in bed for pretty much 3 days straight from like Thursday last week. I think I got to about Thursday afternoon before my temperature was so high I was becoming delirious and was told by my boss, stop working. Go to bed. You idiot. So I did. I went to bed and my fever peaked, I think, at about 103.2, which sounds awfully like a radio frequency for a jazz radio station. But yes, that's what my temperature peaked at. And I have almost recovered. I'm not fully fit yet. I'm still kind of under the weather a wee bit, but I have a voice, which was something I didn't have for a wee while. And that was one of the things that was holding me back from actually doing shows, was the fact that I just didn't have a voice with which I could speak. So it would have been a very silent show, and I don't know enough British Sign Language, and I'm sure you don't know enough British Sign Language for me to be able to communicate with you. So it would have been a difficult couple of shows to do. But anyway, we are here. I am back in the saddle, or seat, whatever you want to call it, and feeling reasonable. I'm not going to say feeling good, and I almost would like to rewrite that song, Feeling Good, you know, the one that Nina Simone had a huge monster hit with. I don't recall who wrote it, but that song that was such a big hit, I'm kind of tempted to rewrite it so that instead of it saying I'm feeling good, it says I'm feeling reasonable, or I'm feeling all right, you know, something like that. That might be quite good. It would be incredibly you know, kind of mediocre, middle of the road to do that. So if you guys can think of any other songs or song titles with which we could mediocre them, so like, for example, Feeling Good becoming Feeling Reasonable or Feeling Average, then certainly do put them in the chat. That might be a fun little game to play whilst we are going through the course of the show. And my phone is not on silent, and it should be, because I forgot. It wants to do a software installation. Great. I'm not doing it now, mate. Go away. I'm trying to put you on silent. There we go. Goodbye. Right, so yes, that might be quite a fun little game to play whilst we are kind of going on with the show. So Ron Figura has the first question of the evening, which is really good. So I think we should tackle that very shortly. Chris Maragno was first in, and he basically starts off by saying Merry Christmas, and then realizes that could either be somewhat late or somewhat early, depending upon your perspective on how you measure the distance between now and Christmas. You're either looking back to it or you're looking forward to it. It kind of depends upon your perspective, I suppose. But he's unable to be here tonight. But he says he'll catch the replay. Chris, you are awesome. I appreciate you immensely. Thank you for dropping by anyway, just to say hello to everybody. We all appreciate you. He says, I wish all of you good fortune and God bless. Thank you very much, mate. We appreciate that. And the same to you. The same to you. So we got Chris, and we got Tony Stringer, and we got John Hawk, and we've got Keith from Radio Tut Frumpet, we got Daryl Harrison, we've got Delta Soundscapes, we got Stephen Wilson, we got Aurora's Boring Alice. That is a great channel name, mate. That really is a great channel name. I like it. And we've got Cal Drajuziak, we've got Don Oliver, we've got Rich Cresswell, who has sponsored a number of challenges that we have done last year. And hopefully, we'll be doing more with him in the future. We'll have to wait and see. And we've got John Hathwaite, we got Danny Taylor, we got Christina, who is here as well. We've over in Denmark, and we got Paul Morgan, we got Harley Bob, we got Bobby Booth, who is one of the original members of my channel, actually, and one of my earliest supporters for my live shows. He has been to pretty much every Sunday Night Live and every Songwriting Simplified that I've ever done, including all the ones that I did with Jonny on his old channel before his channel got taken over, sadly. But he's back with a new channel for those of you that are not aware. And who else do we have here? Let's see. We got Just Bob, we got Brett Marla, and I think I'm Dune at the bottom of the chat. Just Bob says we should call it Feeling Alright, feeling not so toe tapping kind of blah myself. That's quite a long title. That might be a bar of like 14.4 or something there. Alright, so let's go through and we'll see. So Ron has this really great question. He says, can we discuss audiation and how it applies to composing and or songwriting? Audiation. If you don't know what audiation is, I will briefly explain to you what it is. It's basically it's when you hear and comprehend music when there is no sound. Or, the music may never have actually been physically present, but it's in your head. So you are listening to the music in your head. As if it's playing on a radio. That's audiation. So how useful is audiation as a composing tool or as a songwriting tool? To me, it's essential because I have developed over time the practice of this audiation thing since I discovered I could do it when I was maybe about 2 or 3 years old. And I can remember being maybe 3 years old, and getting up late one night and going into my parents' bedroom, and I said to them, guys, can you turn the music down? I'm trying to sleep. And my mother was just like, there's no music. Nobody's playing any music. We're actually trying to sleep ourselves. There's no music playing. Nobody's playing any records or anything. And I'm just like, really? I can hear the Buddy Rich Big Band. What's going on? Who's playing that? Turns out that was the music in my head. I was listening to the Buddy Rich Band in my head. And my dad at that point was just like, he just sat up and was like, really? You can actually hear the Buddy Rich Band in your head? I said, yeah. And he says, what tune's playing? So I named the tune. It was Time Check, actually. And he says, okay, sing it. Sing the A section. So I started singing the A section. And he started singing it with me once he realized I was actually correctly singing it, because he knew the chart. And he was just like, can you sing any of the other parts? If I take the melody, can you sing any of the other parts? So I just started singing one of the other, I think I started singing like one of the trumpet parts, and he was singing the lead alto part. And this was all because I was hearing it in my head. It wasn't that I was remembering it, which is, that's kind of different. Everybody can play something from memory, or most people can play a piece of music from memory. One of the earliest tunes you ever learn might be, Three Blind Mice, something like that. Everybody knows that, even though I played that incorrectly, so you probably spotted that. But that's like, one of the earliest pieces you ever learn, and therefore you can play it from memory. It's just there. It's under your fingers. It's there. That's not the same as audiation. Audiation is where you hear the music in your head, even though the music's not actually physically playing. So that's what audiation is. And so as I was saying, I discovered that I could do this at a very early age. And so I figured, as I got older, I figured this actually might be a useful tool. Because it might help me learn a piece of music faster. And actually it does. It does help me learn a piece of music faster. Because once I've heard the piece, it goes into my head and it stays in my head, and I can audiate that piece of music. I can basically play it back in my head, and it helps me to learn a piece of music because I can stop wherever I want when I'm listening in my head to the piece of music, and I can try and play it correctly. And then I can reference it against what's playing in my head, and I can play, it's literally like having a tape machine in my head. If I need to review a phrase just to make sure I've got it right, I can play that phrase again in my head, and then I can copy it, play it back on the piano. It just makes for me, it makes for a really, really helpful tool for learning a piece of music. So I do this all the time, and I probably do it without really thinking about it. I do this unconscious, without being actually literally unconscious. I do this unconsciously. I don't know what the word is. But I do it without thinking about it. So that's kind of like how I learn a chart. If I'm playing with a band for the very first time, or if I walk into a recording session and I'm playing with a bunch of musicians I don't know, and I'm presented with these charts that I've never heard before, and we maybe have a little run-through session before we actually do takes. And I'm feeling my way. I'm kind of learning it as I go. I'm basically just, following along, and just, if I'm playing drums, I'm just tapping along, just following it, just getting a feel for it. But I'm listening to what they're playing. And then once I've heard it, it's there. It's inside me. It's in my head. It's printed to my track in my head. And so therefore, with that being the case, I can now go and review everything in my head and make sure I've got certain key phrases correct. And then when they say, right, we're going to go for a take, I'm ready. I can play it as if I've played it every day for 10 years. Because it's just there. And so all the key things that I need to reference, if I need to phrase with a saxophone player, I'm phrasing with a saxophone player. And I can even pick out if they're wrong. Like if they mess it up, I can say, hey, no, it doesn't go do-da-do-da, it goes da-da-do-da. You just switch those two notes backwards. That's it. And I can do that. Only having heard the piece once. Twice at the very most. But usually just once. So how does this help as a composing tool? So if you are writing music for the very first time, music that's obviously never been written before, so you are sitting down and you're wanting to compose a piece of music, or you're wanting to write a new song, and you're wanting to start from, you're going to be starting from scratch. You don't have any preconceived ideas. Audiation is a great way to kind of get started with that. And this is actually, by and largely, I think I've talked about this before. This is by and largely my entire approach to songwriting. Is I'm actually writing the song before I'm in this room, or I'm writing the song maybe very late at night whilst I'm lying in bed trying to get off to sleep. Actually, that weirdly is when my brain starts going, right, new music time. Let's get started. Let's start making a new song. And so my brain starts thinking up melodies, and I go, oh, that's a really great melody. Okay, now I've got a counter melody. Oh, great. What chord changes are we going to have under? Oh, great. Now I've got these chord changes. And I've started working out a drum part. I've started working out a bass part. I've worked out what rhythm guitars are going to play, voicings for them. And so all of this is happening inside of my head. I'm literally hearing it as if the band are already on the stage playing this tune that's never been written before. And I'm just standing there listening to it. And but I can mute parts if I need to. If I don't want to hear drums, somehow I can just mute the drums. and only listen to everything else. Or, and this is actually particularly useful if I'm writing like for a choir or for an orchestra or for a big band, and I just want to check a particular phrase in the altos for a choir against the sopranos. Like, let's say the altos have the melody, and I want to check the counter melody in the sopranos against it and make sure that there are no kind of ugly clashes, or there's not too much crossover between registers, that kind of thing. So I can just switch off in my head. I can switch off the basses. I can tell the basses to sit down and shut up, and I can do the same for the tenors. I can say, guys, take a break. And I can just listen to those two parts. Now, it's widely reputed that Mozart could do the same thing. And so it's widely reputed that is how he wrote most of his symphonies and his operas. He rarely sat at the piano doing it. He would sit in different parts of the house, or he would be in a stagecoach on the roads, because road trips back then were very, very long. So if he was going from Salzburg and he was traveling to Paris, for example, to play at the French court, he might decide, for that occasion, I need to have a new piece of music. I need to have a new concerto or something like that. So he would in his head be writing all of this and obviously notating it for the musician, so that when he gets to Paris, he can present it to the court's orchestra and the court's concertmaster and say, here, let's get to work rehearsing this piece, and then we perform the command performance before the king on Wednesday or whatever. And that's reputedly how Mozart would compose his works. He would do it all in his head using this audiation process. I believe it is something you can develop, but I don't know how you go from zero with audiation, if you know what I mean. I don't know how you actually start doing it. For me, it was just there. So I have tried to do a little bit of research to try and figure out, is there a specific way in which you can start, or are there certain exercises that you can try to do to get yourself hearing a piece of music in your head, especially a piece of music that does not exist, like a composition would be. So there are a few different techniques. One technique is to kind of switch your mind off first. So start thinking about something completely unrelated, like what you had for lunch yesterday, or something like that. Or, think about a piece of music in a completely different realm, a completely different genre, a completely different place altogether. And do that for maybe, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds maybe, and see if you can actually start to hear a piece of music begin to emerge in your head. Or like if you were working on something, let's say you were working on a piece you were practicing yesterday, see if you can actually hear that piece in your head without getting the sheet music out, without getting the songbook out, without picking up your guitar or your saxophone or your flute or your piano or whatever your instrument might be, and see if you can actually hear it in your head. And then once you can start to hear it in your head, then you can go and approach your instrument. But this time, if you are a chart reader, don't get the songbook out, don't get the sheet music out. See if you can play it from what you hear in your head. So you're not playing from memory, you're playing from hearing it in your head, which is a different memory function. Playing it from memory plays from familiarity, which is a different part of your memory. So this audiation thing is a separate part of your memory. You're wanting to hear the music in your head, not remember how you place your fingers on the instrument, touch memory, or something like that. You're wanting to hear the music in your head. So that's kind of like the first kind of exercise that you can do. And, you know, the more you do this, the more you start beginning to hear stuff in your head. And before you know it, you can start expanding, you know, the principle out from music that you know and that you practice, or, you know, you can try stretching this audiation thing back. So you're not just talking about, okay, bring to my internal jazz club, or whatever it is. In my case, it's an internal jazz club, but whatever it is, bring to mind the piece that you worked on yesterday. Now let's stretch that back. Last week, last month, last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. See how far you can push that back. To not just recalling how it goes at your instrument, but hearing the whole thing in your head. Hearing the melody, hearing the chords, hearing the style, hearing the rhythm, and any other accompaniment that there might be for your piece of music. So when you can start doing this with established pieces of music, then you can start to expand that back to, okay, what about composing a piece of music using this technique? So starting to hear a phrase, starting to then work on a counter melody to that phrase, put the two things in your mind together. Great, okay. Now what chords will go well with that? So you start to hear different chord changes that will support these two parts. And then as you start to flesh out your arrangement in this audiation place, in this recording studio in your head, or jazz club in your head, whatever it might be, then you can start to get into Studio One, or at a piano, or with your guitar, and start to kind of flesh it out and start documenting what's going on in your head. So for me, this whole audiation process is incredibly valuable, and it cuts down actually the amount of time it takes for me to compose a piece. If I basically don't use that technique and just try and compose a piece of music a more conventional or a more traditional way, it takes me a lot longer to write a piece of music, to be honest. But if I'm already working on it in my head, by the time I've finished it in my head and I start working on it in Studio One, I start bringing in those parts, start playing them in, or hiring musicians to come and play their parts and that kind of thing. You know, the work is already finished to me, and it won't be to anybody else, but to me, it's already complete. It's already finished. I'm not actually doing anything new to me. To other people, it's just like, oh, this, you know, it's all new. I'm composing it as it's going into Studio One, as far as other people might be concerned. But for me, all I'm doing is just documenting what's already existing in my head. So I hope that you understand a little bit about how that works, and how I've used it. It is something that takes a little bit of getting. For some of you, you may already be able to do this, and you've just never really been aware of that's what it is. You know, when you actually hear a full band in your head, complete with a good mix as well, that's audiation, and it's a tool, and it's a skill that you can get better at, and you can improve, and you can use to make music. And in fact, one of the other ways in which I use this audiation tool is to actually try, you know, when I'm improvising, when I'm doing a piano solo or a bass solo or something like that, in my head, I'm already maybe on the next chorus, and I'm trying different lines out to see how well they fit the chord changes. And then by the time, you know, the physical me catches up with the audiation me, the lines are already good, and I'm happy to play them. So for me, it's less kind of really improvisation, even though it is improvisation. I'm thinking ahead. And again, that's another way in which you can stretch that audiation thing. Start visualizing in your mind what the next phrase is going to sound like. How does it sound? What notes? Try and pitch those notes in your head. Pitch those notes in your head against the chords that are coming up next. And then once you go, yeah, this is a great line, now you're ready to play it because, you're maybe 4 bars ahead. So it's useful from an improvisational tool, being able to think ahead and plan out, how you're going to address the next set of chord changes. Now, obviously, the faster the piece of music, the more of a challenge that is, especially if you're going to play something like John Coltrane's Giant Steps and you're going to play that at 320 beats a minute. That will be a challenge because you need to not only think quite far ahead and plan quite far ahead, but also, you think, I'll just think maybe 8 or 16 bars ahead. At 320 beats a minute, 16 bars does not last long. It's about 15 seconds, maybe less. So you're only going to think maybe 10 seconds tops ahead of yourself before you're actually playing it. So it's really useful for composing, for improvising, for just sitting down and playing by ear. If you just sit down and just, at a piano at a train station and just decide to just let your fingers walk over the piano keys, you can use this technique to kind of shape something that, people can actually engage with at the station. And they'll say, oh, wow, that's amazing. Did you write that? And you go, no, I just made that up I just made that up right there. But it will really impress people because to them, when you say that, they'll go, wow, that's incredible. You just made this neat little package composition on the spot. And you're just going, but to you, the composing work is being done in your head first before it comes out of the fingers and outside and then out of the piano. So I hope that helps, because really, seriously, Ron, that is a fantastic question. And it's a fantastic concept to talk about. And one that actually, although I'm familiar with it and I use it, it's not one that I've ever really sat down and talked about at great length to anybody. Really. But it is a great tool to use. Ron Figueroa says here, in the movie Amadeus, there is a scene where he says it's in his head and the rest is scribbling and bibbling. Yeah, he is reputed to have said such. In one of his letters to his sister, Nano, he said that, and they obviously liked that line, so they kind of used it in a different part of the film. Elusive 1970 is here. He says, question about key changes. Why is it when changing from C major to F minor under a 2-5-1? Talk to me about why the C is dominant. Why isn't it minor? Good question. The dominant chord is never minor. When you are doing a 2-5-1 to get from the key of C to the key of F minor, because it's a pivot chord with a leading tone that leads to the tonic of the new key. That's why it's major that's why it's a dominant chord with a major third. Let me show you. So there's the third of the chord, the E there in the C chord, and that wants to resolve upwards to there, to F, and the seventh wants to resolve down to that major third. Now, you're talking about a minor 2-5-1, not a major 2-5-1, which is what I did there. okay? But that's the important thing I needed to establish, was the importance of voice leading. Okay, it's important that you have that tension there, that diminished, that flatted fifth, tritone, whatever you want to call it, has that resolution, okay? Now, if we're doing a minor 2-5-1, in the minor key, chord 2 is a half diminished chord. It's not a minor chord. So if we were going to F major, we would be doing G minor, C7, F, right? But let's take that F major scale. So we got that D flat there, right? Okay, so that's that F minor scale. With that leading tone there, the E natural. Okay, so that's why we have the half diminished chord. It's basically the minor 7 flat the 5. So minor 7, but we have to have the flat 5 because D flat is in the key of F minor. And I'm using a C7 flat 9 there to kind of emphasize that D flat. And now we're in F minor, okay? So the important thing here with a dominant chord going to a minor key is that leading tone. That's why the dominant chord is not a minor chord, okay? Let's do the same thing, but this time with C minor. And you'll see how it doesn't really work. It doesn't really, it's a weak chord movement. The other point to make is this. We're going to F minor. We have not arrived at F minor yet. Okay, so the C7 chord has the E natural in it because C major has an E natural in it. It doesn't have an E flat. Okay, so the E flat only becomes a thing in the key of F minor. Okay, so you need that leading tone, the E natural, to resolve to the F. Okay? And that's how you do a 2-5-1 in the minor key. So let's establish that C major sound to start with. I'm going to move the mic over this way a little bit. In classic Billy Joel / Elton John kind of fashion. Established that nice C major tonality, and we're going to go to the chord 4 minor, F minor, with the 2-5-1, G minor 7 flat 5, C minor 7, maybe with a flat 9, and now we are in F minor. And if we want to get back, 2-5-1 in C major, and we'll go back again. And what I did there was a classic case of a tierce de Picardy. I did G augmented, G7, and finish with the major when you're expecting me to do the minor, because that's usually what happens, but not in that case. All right, so that is why the dominant is always with a major third because of the leading tone that the third of the chord provides going into the new key. You can test that theory on any 5-to-1 that you like. Okay. When you change under 2-5-1, aren't all those chords in the new key? No, they are going to the new key, but you are not in the new key until you arrive at its tonic. Okay? So, let's demonstrate with a different key. So this time we will go from C major to A flat minor. This will be an interesting sound. C major. Remember, we're going to A flat minor. So we need that B flat half diminished 7, E7 flat 9, sorry, E flat 7 flat 9. Here we go. And there we are. In A flat minor. And I went A flat major so that I could do a G7 back to C major. But I want to go back to that A flat minor because it's nice and dark. So we want that B flat 7 flat 5 again. We're back in A flat minor. And now we'll just do a pivot 5-1 to C major. There we go, we're back in C major. Okay, so you are always talking about it is a 2-5-1 going to the new key. So you have to use chord 2 and chord 5 and chord 1 of the new key. But you don't actually arrive in the new key till you get to chord 1. Chord 1 is the tonic of the new key. Okay, so that is why it is when it is. Okay. Brett says, when you were going back to C, was that a half diminished or did you play that as a minor? I'm not sure what you're referring to there, Brett. Got to admit. So, seeing as we are talking about 5-1s or 2-5-1s, this is where we can also cover a little bit of ground with secondary dominants. So we've just covered a little bit about chord 5, which is the dominant. So what about secondary dominants? What are secondary dominants? Secondary dominants, if you were to go back a chord 5, you would find a dominant that is a secondary dominant. Okay, so let me give you an example. So chord 2 is a secondary dominant. So is chord 3. So is chord 6. So we can do a string of secondary dominants, and we can have E minor 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7, 1, and that's a 3-6-2-5-1. So 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. Okay, so that's a whole string of secondary dominants. So let's say we make a string of 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, 5-1 and see where we end up. So let's go C, E7 to A, G minor, C7, F7 with F sharp in the bass. That's the secondary dominant going to G minor, to C, back to the F again, G, and C again. F minor, F over A, B flat half diminished, minor 2/5 in A flat minor, F7 going to B flat major, C7, that's another secondary dominant going to F. So that's a whole string of 5/1s and 2/5/1s that took me to a variety of different key centers, albeit all of them being very temporary, especially what I did at the end there with the climbing bass line, where, you know, we were going F, D, G, and then this is E7, A minor, that's a 5/1. That's at 5 going to B minor. Then we did a 3/6 to 5 to G, and then I did a D flat 7, which is a flat 5 sub going to chord 1. So secondary dominants, so chord 5s chained together. So you're going 5/1, 5/1, 5/1, 5/1, 5/1, 5/1, 2, 5/1. This is another brilliant songwriting device because this will get you chord changes for a song for free, no effort. No effort, no calculation, no working out to be done. They're just there. Use them. And you can work out a whole set of very useful popular song style chord changes to make your song. So, I mean, this is how songs like I Got Rhythm and, you know, I Got Plenty of Nothing and other Gershwin classic songs were all written. They were all written probably in 15 minutes or less. Why? Because in the 1930s, in that Brill building on Tin Pan Alley, Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, the Gershwin brothers, and many others were all sat there in little offices with a little upright piano, and they were writing 50, 60, 70 songs per day. Not per week, not per month, not per year, per day. They were churning out all of these songs every day. So they needed reliable, simple, easy to use sets of chord changes that will get the job done, that they can just put a melody on top of, write some lyrics, done. There's a song. And they would be very quickly collated into songbooks, which then would be sold at music stores and music bookstores, and then they would find their way into people's homes. No TVs, no video games, no internet, no GameCubes, no Nintendo Switches, no Minecraft, no Roblox, no none of that stuff to play at all. You know, no Grand Theft Auto. None of that stuff existed. So that was their entertainment. And that's why the sheet music industry was a massive revolution to start with. And that's why songwriting devices like the ones we have here in the 21st century are so easy to get, so easy to use and so easy for you guys to get your hands on and make use of for your songs, so you can actually write more and more and more and more and more and more songs and be more and more prolific and exercise those songwriting muscles for things like the upcoming songwriting challenges that there are going to be in 2024. So be on the lookout for those. When we start launching those, there's going to be a very, very, very entertaining spring/Easter songwriting challenge, which I'm already in the throes of putting together. It's going to be a lot of fun, and the emphasis is going to be on fun for that particular challenge. And then, of course, we'll have the whole Halloween challenge, and then we'll also have a Christmas challenge. Those are the three main songwriting challenges. So between now and then, we can get into things like secondary dominance, 3/6-2-5-1 chord progressions, 2-5-1s, and all of these other harmonic devices that you can use to make chord changes for your songs in 5 minutes or less. It's like a microwavable ready meal for songwriters, basically, is what I'm offering you for 2024. So we're going to get into all of those kind of techniques. Elusive 1970 says, how do you find melodies for 50 songs in a day? You know what? You use simple scale devices like pentatonic scales or other 5-note patterns. You know, there are established pentatonic scales, you know, where you play 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 of the scale. You know, those are fairly well established pentatonic patterns, and you'll see those all over songwriting from that period. Lots of pentatonic patterns. But there are other 5-note patterns as well. Why 5 notes? Because they're easy, and you can shift them around in the generally accepted average vocal range of most people, which is about 1.5 octaves. So that's why pentatonic scales are really useful, because you've got that kind of small range that most people can sing in. And so that's what they did in Tin Pan Alley. They just established the fact most people have this range. Therefore, that's kind of the tessitura for all of our songs. They will all have that range. And so you make use of pentatonic scales, you make use of, you know, stepwise motions, you make use of leaps, of fourths, of fifths, of major sixths, of minor sixths, those kind of intervals to help illustrate your, you know, help kind of sell the narrative of your song. You know, if your song is particularly melancholic or evocative, there's a great harmonic device, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Chord 1 to chord 4 minor. It's one of the most melancholic chord progressions that there is. Or if you're John Williams and you want to get something that is evocative, slightly mysterious, how about moving by a major third? So chord C to chord E major. Or by minor third. That's all over movies like Star Wars, for example. But you'll find it in other epic films as well, like Jesus of Nazareth. You'll find it there. You'll find it in Ben-Hur, and also the Ten Commandments. Why? Because those are evocative chord changes that suggest something that is a little bit mysterious. And so those kind of chord movements suit biblical epics. Because you're talking about God, or you're talking about Jesus, or you're talking about Moses, or whomever you're talking about in one of those biblical epics. So moving chords by a third, or a major third or a minor third, is another useful harmonic device, because E major doesn't belong in the key of C. It contains a G sharp. So what scale is that going to lend itself to? It's going to lend itself to that particular scale, which is kind of like a C major scale with a raised fifth, the sharp 5. It's an augmented scale, essentially. So you don't play the fifth. It's a weird sounding scale, right? So having that sharp 5 in the scale instead of the natural 5 makes something a little bit kind of ethereal, evocative, maybe slightly Middle Eastern sounding. So yeah, so that's kind of where I was going with that. So that's how you find melodies. Let's see. John Hathaway says, regarding melodies, ever used a D8 or D12 dice to generate random melodies or hooks? Oh, we're talking about chance music. Yes, I have written chance music. What is chance music? Chance music is, they called it aleatory music. That's the proper musicological term for it. And this is actually something I studied when I was at university. And by the way, aleatorical music is hilarious. What is chance music? It's music where the notes are generated by chance. So there are several different approaches that you could take. For example, you could line up a collection of 12 snails and write the numbers 1 to 12 on their shells and then have a little race. And then those 12 numbers would represent the 12 notes of the chromatic scale. Right? And then what might happen is you would see you'd have a finish line and you'd see which numbers cross first and in which order. So the numbered snail that crosses the line, you write down that number. And then you do that for all until all 12 snails have crossed the line. And then that determines your note row. It's not a scale, it's a note row. And so now you have the chromatic scale in a completely random order that is now a note row. Now, it's chance music because this is how you generate the note row. But then how you actually go about composing your piece of music to avoid complete and utter chaos, there are some rules. One of those rules is this. Once you've established your tone row, when you are composing your melody, each one of those notes in your row must be used once in each phrase. But once you have used that note, you cannot repeat that note. So you could, if you are into minimalism, just repeat the same order over and over again, and you would bore everyone to death and they'd want to commit suicide, or they want to go out and rampantly buy Kenny G CDs, which is the same thing, arguably. Or what you would do is you would then go, okay, I cannot repeat the same note again once I have played it. So what can I do? I can take my phrase that I've just created, I can flip it upside down, I can play it backwards, I can play it backwards and upside down at the same time. So you've got at least 3 different variations for your phrase. Once you've played that phrase, you now have to generate a new phrase using the same note row. But again, you cannot use the same note twice. So even if you've used those notes in the phrase before, you can use them again, obviously, because otherwise you'd be stuck with only having one phrase. So when you get to your second phrase, you can use all of those notes again because it's a new phrase, but again, you cannot repeat a note. So once you play a note, that's it for that phrase. It can only be used once in each phrase. And so you generate another set of notes. Now, here's the thing. The other rule is you must avoid intervallic relationships. What do I mean by intervallic relationships? So let's say when in my tone row of 12 tones, I play a C, or let's say I play an E, right? And I decide that my next note should be a C. I can't do that. That's a major third. So I have to pick a different note. C sharp, no, can't do that either. That's a minor third. So I have to think about a completely non-normal intervallic relationship. So I could do a tritone. Yep, I can do that. I can do a minor ninth. I can do a minor second. I can do a major second. That's a fifth there, so I can't do that, so I have to flat the 5. Or, whatever. I can't sharp the 5 because that develops that major kind of third sound again. So yes, it's chance music, but there are rules to it. But it is a fun way for generating random melodies. And does it sound like it's atonal? Well, it is non-tonal in as much as there is no specific key center and there are no specific major minor type chords, but you can still create chords. But it would be entirely chromatic music. And this was music that was developed by people like Berg, Webern, Bern, and Schoenberg, and a few other kind of European composers in the late 20th century. Berlioz is another guy, French composer, who eventually ended up making a whole bunch of really excellent, outstanding electronic music and innovations for electronic music, such as tape loops and things like that. He was using tape loops before tape loops were being used popularly in recording studios for pop music. That's what Berlioz was doing. Except he was like doing these in live performance, which is pretty daring if you ask me. But yeah, all of those composers from like the middle 1930s onwards through until like the end of the 20th century, really, were engaging in all of these kind of chromatic and 12-tone style compositions. To some people, they sound completely devoid of any tonality whatsoever, and it just sounds like a mess. It just sounds like complete, or whatever. But if you listen carefully, you can actually discern musicality and musical phrases. It's just that the musical language is a little bit complicated. So yeah, I'm sure, John, you did not expect that to go that way, but it did. Does the non-repeating no rule apply to every voice in the ensemble? If they are playing that phrase, yes. So if they are playing that particular phrase that you have developed, yes, it cannot be used again anywhere in your ensemble. Okay? So repeating notes are not a thing. As is avoiding normal tonal intervallic relationships such as fifths, fourths, major thirds, minor thirds. It's fun. It makes for let's see, it makes for something interesting and different. It's a different way of writing music, let's just say that. So if you don't want to do this in a chromatic sense, so with 12 tones, reduce it. Maybe decide it's going to be just white notes only instead. Then in this case you'd have 7 snails instead of 12. So do what you like with the other snails, cook them and maybe put them into a sandwich and give them to a Frenchman, or do something else with the snails. Release them into the wild and say, off you go and have a nice little holiday, or something like that. Man, flu meds are good. But yeah, so you can either have 7, you can have 12, or you can just develop your own scalic ideas if you want, like a hexachords. Take the first 6 notes of one scale and the upper 6 notes of another scale. That's another device. So you could take the first 6 notes of a B flat scale and the lower, the lower 6 notes of a B major scale and put those 2 things together, and that's your new scale. We call that hexachordal combinatoriality. There you go. I said it in one take. That's kind of definitely not Songwriting Simplified. That's kind of songwriting for eggheads, but it's fun to do. So if the voices are playing in counter melody as harmony, then they can use a note played by a different voice. No. You can't use the same note again. So it doesn't work like that. Anyway, that's us for the show, folks. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your patience for last week with me not doing a show. Thanks for the great questions, Ron and John Hathwaite as well. They were very, very good questions. And yes, it was a little bit, certainly the latter half of the show was definitely songwriting complicated. And the first, 2/3 of the show was Songwriting Simplified for sure. But yes, secondary dominants and things like that are incredibly useful. So E7s, A7s, D7s in the key of C major, they'll take you places, put the 3rd in the bass and you can do this nice little, chromatic passing, walking thing in the bass, which adds some nice drama to your music. So make use of some of those skills, give audiation a try, and I will see you next time. I think Keith at Radio Talk Trumpet wants to do a Zoom because I believe he now has a Zoom account all of his own. Could one of my moderators please go and get his Zoom link and drop it in the chat, because Keith is not a moderator, so he cannot post it himself. And I'm sure he would like to have a few people along for that. So if one of the mods could do that, that would be great. Just go get that from Keith and drop it in the chat, and then we can all pile over there. Our thoughts are very much with Billy, with his health issues at the moment. Billy, we love you. We wish you a speedy recovery, and we hope you're doing well. And we hope to see you around these parts again very, very soon. To everyone else, I wish you all a very good night, and I'll see you on Sunday for Sunday Night Live. Take it easy, everybody. Good night. There you go, folks. The link to the Zoom is now in the chat. If you would like to join us, please do pop over. Good night.